All right, hello and welcome to 10 by 10. I am in the amazing Fora space. 10 by 10, tough questions, turn around the 10th of every month with technology and future thinking folks. My name is Paul Armstrong. I run the Emerging Technology Advisory here, Forth. And today from Fora's Shoreditch Shiny Video Studio, I'm going to be asking the tough questions. But I want to hear from you in the chat or send me via a DM, however you want to get it to me, I will find it. It is the start of season 2 of 10 by 10, and we're shaking things up for the first time with 3, count them, geniuses. Hey, it's been a rough time since we've been away, so we thought you deserved a treat. I'm joined today by the 3 incredibly smart people that I'm about to list. You've got Alex Jenkins, Editorial Director of Contagious, which is a creative and strategic intelligence service that helps ad agencies and brands deliver more creative, innovative and effective marketing. We've got Catherine Bishop. She is Foresight Editor of Future Laboratory, one of the world's most renowned futures consultancies. And rounded out by the veritable Jason Amanda, Chief Research Officer at GWI, a leading audience targeting company. They all do more than I've just told you about, so we'll send you all details about that after the webinar is finished. But before we get going, I just wanted to remind everyone watching Fora have a stack of events happening all the time as well, not just 10 by 10. There's one coming up actually, including Extinction Rebellion, which is going to be cracking. It's a hybrid event. So if you want to find out more about that, point your browsers to foraspace.com/events, and you can sign up there. There's loads more as well. So before we get sort of cracking, tell us in the chat anything you want to sort of know as well, if you want questions or anything like that. But as you can see at the top, we've got Jason, Catherine and Alex just raring to go and answering my thrilling questions, which only they have seen. So they haven't seen each other's, but they have seen their ones, because obviously they're data-driven folks. They like to be a bit prepared and that sort of stuff. Normally 10 by 10 is a bit more shoot from the hip, but yeah, we wanted them to give you the best stuff. So we thought that. So thanks for attending as well. And thank you each of them. How's everyone doing? Jason, start with you. How are you doing out scale of 1 to 10?
I'm pretty good. I'd say 9.
Excellent. I love that honest answer. Catherine, you're up next. 1 to 10.
Yeah, 8 or 9 actually. Well, the sun makes everything better, doesn't it? So, you know,
that
all good.
Alex, what are you? 1 to 10.
I'd give myself a solid 6.
Oh, all right. I'm going to rerun the fun after. I hope we haven't dragged you down. But Alex, there's the only way up, right? For you.
Exactly, all right. Yeah.
Almost the weekend.
Exactly. Yeah, absolutely. Alex, let's start with you. Consumers, they've gone through a really massive period of trauma, I think it's fair to sort of say, and the pandemic has sort of reintegrated, they've got a reintegration with life to sort of happen, not just workspaces, but lots of other things. For many also, it's not over. They haven't even had the first vaccine, let alone 2. There's people who are holding out. Bearing in mind all of that, how should brands act in order to sort of push themselves, but not over a cliff, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I mean, for me, the context of this is, so I'm going to go super macro and try and kind of bring it down to brands a little bit. So obviously, after the last year we've had, the global debt is at what, around $280 trillion. It's more than 350% of global GDP. As a brand, you've got to find growth. Okay, so that's kind of the big headline in a way. As we get down to the specifics of this year. Now, one of the things we do at Contagious, we do something called the Genius Survey, where we try and round up the smartest people we can find from around the world. So academics, economists, CEOs, CMOs, and we ask them all just one question, the same question: what is the single biggest challenge for brands and businesses over the next 12 to 18 months? And normally we get quite clear answers. So a couple of years back, it's all about trust. A couple of years back, more recently, it was about, you've got to be a lot more agile. This year, for the first time, I've never seen so much uncertainty in the experts. Everyone from, sort of the head of The Economist to the head of Unilever was just saying, we're really just in a period of waiting and seeing. It's kind of like we're unwrapping the bandages off the patient. And we need to see kind of how the world will look in order to work out what we're going to do about it. So I think, in terms of actually how a brand should react, for me, it comes down to kind of one thing, which is as a starting point, you've got to have your organizing principle. You've got to be really clear on that. You might call it a purpose or a mission statement. I prefer organizing principle, just that really clear statement of why the brand exists, what it's here to do, a North Star that anyone in the organization can use to make practical decisions against. It's going to inform how you behave and how you communicate. Because what we saw last year was that the brands that had that clear and really well understood organizing principle throughout the organization were able to react swiftly and really appropriately to what was happening. Not just COVID, but things like, you know, Black Lives Matter. They reacted well to things like the George Floyd killing, all that stuff. A great example would be Dove. You know, we've seen, you know, the campaign for real beauty running for 17 years now. The pandemic came along while a lot of brands scrabbled like, well, what do we do? What do we do? On the marketing side of things, you know, Dove just created this very simple campaign, Courage is Beautiful, championing the frontline heroes, you know, the frontline care workers, you know, their mask lines, this thing. It was just a perfect expression of support for what was going on in the world, but also a perfect expression of what the brand stood for. So perfect, it almost felt inevitable. Of course, that's what Dove was going to do. But it could only do it because it knew who it was, why it exists in the world. So, you know, I think a good test practically for your organization is ask a group of people to separately write down what they think the company's organizing principle is. If they all write down different things, you need to start there. You're not aligned. And kind of whatever happens, we're seeing so much change. It's going to be very hard to predict. It's not going to be about planning what to do. It's more about planning to react to whatever happens. And it's got to start with that organizing principle.
I don't know if you've seen today, have you seen the furore over Brewdog?
Yes.
Any advice for Brewdog? Anyone? I'm just, this is not a question I've fielded, so it's definitely, you know, feel free to go to Switzerland, but any advice? I mean, Alex, you've just mentioned there, you know, they should have a North Star. They felt they had a North Star, but obviously their culture is somewhat up for debate and that sort of thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think their North Star, in a way, depending on how positive or negative you want to look at it, I think they've lived it. You know, they've always been, you know, we are the challenger. You know, I remember we interviewed James Watt like a year or two after the brand founded, and he said, you know, the alcohol industry is sick and we're the fucking doctor. And it was that kind of just smash the doors in, take no prisoners, we don't really care, we're going to get things done on our own terms. And that seems to be the culture.
I mean, you could argue from that statement alone, here's the Facebook of alcohol, right? That sort of stuff.
Yeah.
You know, move fast, break things, and then we'll apologize for it later.
Yeah.
An interesting sort of stance. Jason, Catherine, you both smirked at that. Tell me a bit more what you think of Brewdog.
I mean, I think just it is that thing sometimes of if you live by that constant disruption, it's like any trend, like it eventually kind of eats itself, because then the antithesis comes along because people get kind of bored of that attitude and the whole kind of like punk thing that obviously they've been known for, you know, like even last year, that playful thing they did with Audi when they kind of created an Audi style beer, etc. So I think it's fun, but there does come a point where people do get a bit tired and there's that question of what next. And in our recent macro trend that we produced, Elastic Brands, we talked about this idea of much to what Alex was saying, you know, like how does your brand be agile and move with the times and retain relevance, but also maybe sometimes your brand just needs to go into hibernation. And it could just be in future that we see brands take actually a year or so out to kind of recalibrate, work out what they need to stand for, read the market, and that not necessarily be a bad thing, of course, if they have the capacity and the means to do that. So sometimes there also needs to be a time when brands just need to say nothing and step back and actually just really think about what is their raison d'etre, basically, you know, what are they here to do? Purpose is done now, you know, there's no thing about necessarily having a purpose, but why do you exist and how are you going to be relevant in the future as well? So hibernation brands is something that we might say companies should keep an eye on thinking about doing, maybe.
Jason, you're the data bot of the group. Everybody use data, but it's your lifeblood. Tell us a bit more about how consumers are feeling about brands and sort of maybe their pandemic responses and sort of how does that help people move forward?
Yeah, it's a usual case where the consumer is pretty complex in what they want, and often they'll say one thing, but they actually want another thing. So they want brands to be showing their support, to be offering help, but they want it in ways which really feel authentic. But ask them what authentic means and they'll contradict themselves all over the place. So I think that the Dove example is a nice place of a brand that was true to itself and did something that felt like it was right for that brand. I think the danger for consumers is brands jumping in, offering support or running initiatives that just feel so alien to that brand and feel very opportunistic rather than genuinely helpful. But yeah, pleasing consumers is never easy at the best of times, let alone when they're emerging from the weirdest, most unpredictable few months they've ever been through.
Yeah. I don't think it's over, is it, really, for a lot of people? But, you know, depending on variants and that sort of stuff, I think people have reevaluated a lot, not just, you know, in their personal lives, but also relationships with brands. I must admit, I've heard, it's not just my friends, it's definitely other people as well, a lot more focus on sustainability, which I want to talk on a little bit later. But people are now sort of starting to get that idea. And it's not just because plastic bags are now 5p more dear, or they've not been given that sort of stuff. There does seem to be a real sort of shift towards that sustainability element, much more than it was previously. And I think that comes, you know, focusing around a relationship with brands that sort of people have. I hear that word banged about really frequently, especially when it comes to branding. And I know you guys talk, or a few of you deal in that specifically. How realistic do you think it is after a pandemic? Not that there's a case study that we all lived through, to have a relationship with a brand is, you know, how should brands be planning to have a relationship with consumers in the next 24 months? Alex, start with you.
Oh, right, sorry. I guess like two parts to this. I'm deeply skeptical of the whole relationship thing, if I'm 100% honest. You know, if the analogy I'd use is, if you've ever wanted to go on a date with someone and they didn't want to go on a date with you, you can't force them into it. You can't make them pity you so much that you end up in a relationship with them. And that's brands and people. Brands want the relationship. I don't think anyone really does. Like, as a sample size of one, like if you think about your daily routine and you think, right, I get up in the morning, I get dressed. Do I want a relationship with my underwear brand? Probably not. If I go and like make breakfast, do I want a relationship with my butter brand, with my milk brand, with my orange juice brand? If I'm traveling to work, do I care about a relationship with my car brand, or the, you know, the transport network, all these things? No, to be honest, I just want shit to work so I can get on with my life, if I'm blunt about this. So that one side, I guess the useful bit is, how do you help people get on with their lives in the context of the last 12 months, when you've had people living through uncertainty about, you know, their freedom of movement, about their employment, their housing, education, of course, their health. So it's hugely stressful. So I think you need to plan the relationship that you will have with them in the context of wanting to return to maybe not normal, but certainly a less stressful life. So anything you can do to alleviate that stress or appear helpful, be a good thing, which can be anything from like the tone of voice in your copywriting to the actions of your company. I mean, a really nice example, it was super small, but I quite liked it, was in the alcohol sector. Like Heineken offered free haircuts to people in pubs if they bought a pint of Heineken, which was, it had like it understood like a consumer need of like, we all desperate for a bloody haircut. People wanted to go to the pub. It had a really nice historical thing, like when Prohibition ended in the US, Heineken had actually had ships full of Heineken waiting offshore so they could be the first beer delivered into the UK. And it had that sense of the first beer you're going to have is a Heineken. We know that, like, when people go into pubs, they don't really know what their beer of choice is until they get to the bar, but you tend to stick on that beer. So if you make that the first beer, there's a bit of that stuff going on there. But yeah, I mean, for me, I think that the relationship thing I'm a little bit skeptical about. And I'm going to just repeat what I said earlier. I don't think you can plan that far ahead, because it's going to be so changeable. The best you can do is just plan to react.
It feels like, you know, extracting something from what you just said, it feels like if brands are planning for the next 12 to 24 months, the one thing that they can do is plan on having a sort of the moment element to what they're doing, whether that's trying to get a relationship with a consumer or a customer, or reacting to a moment, if that makes sense. So rather, you know, building those sort of structures in the department and that sort of thing, that sounds like something that would be a smart sort of use of people's time. But I never heard of them before. Before it was like plan, execute, plan. And now it feels a bit more that people have to sort of plan, execute, and that sort of thing. So yeah. The best brands at the moment I see doing good social are ones that react not just to memes, but also can react physically to doing things. Like you say, putting the boats, you know, that's a big deal for them and that sort of stuff. But it has to be something little that people can do to not just have moments of, you know, whatever that term is, moments of greatness or, you know, reflection or whatever it is, but really, I think, focus on elements that impact a brand strategy, but also help the consumer's life. You know, you're never going to be able to do it en masse, but it's the PR ability of those things, I think, that sort of work. When we think about values, I think that's my one sort of thing which I'm always skeptical on. Alex. When we've seen a lot of people, talk about sustainability. As far as I'm aware, the world is not full of Patagonias. Not everyone's a B Corp and that sort of thing. How worried should brands be about walking the talk yet, or are we way off from people not buying from brands who are, maybe put the earth first?
So was that to me? Yeah.
I'm going to put it all three of you because I think
I'll let someone else go because I've wound
Jason
on.
was nodding, so he can go first.
Yeah, I can go on this. I think it's a healthy dose of skepticism is good. But what was really interesting in GWI's coronavirus data was we've been tracking sustainability attitudes for a long time. And historically, you always saw consumers putting more responsibility on the brand and the company than they would accept themselves. What we've seen coming through is more of an equaling out of that and a feeling that consumers are actually willing to do a bit more. That doesn't suddenly mean they're going to pay £5 extra for an eco-friendly product or make huge shifts, but there's a sense that we're all in it together that we haven't seen before coming through the data. And I think ways that brands can respond to that don't have to be huge gestures. It's that little thing like replacing the plastic straw with a paper straw and putting that prominently on your packaging so that consumer feels better about making that purchase they were probably going to make anyway. There will be the hardcore. We definitely see that in our data. There are people who are actively leaving brands and making big decisions based on their sustainability views, but they are the minority. I think at the moment, sustainability is rising as a theme for everyone, but most people just want to see little things that make them feel a bit better about the purchases they're going to make.
Yeah. Catherine, did you
want to? It's a tough one because it is the real chicken and egg situation, and there's always been this thing of like, me as the little consumer, is me doing my bit actually making a difference when the big corporations could do a great deal and actually make more change faster, but the collective groundswell is what helps push these things forward. Again, to Jason's point, a lot of the data that we do see is that there's a lot of people who want to be more sustainable or claim that they're living more sustainably, but actually their day-to-day choices aren't really there. And in many ways, again, that chicken and egg thing of if the brands actually just make the decision and make the change that the consumer doesn't have a choice, that they are by default buying or consuming in a way that is more sustainable, or the option is just very easily there for them, then that's going to be a lot better for them than them having to actually go out and search. We've been tracking how retailers, especially, we recently published a trend called Criteria Retail, where we looked at retailers actually setting quite strict criteria around who they will sell or what they will sell. I mean, Ocado has, to that point, a whole B Corp aisle now, virtual aisle on its website, where you can only shop from brands that are certified B Corp, for example. So, that immediately means if you're a conscious consumer, you can go on Ocado and go, well, I only want to shop from those companies. Other platforms, there's one called It's a Park, which is a subsidiary of H&M, which launched initially as almost like an inspiration site, kind of like an Instagram meets fashion, where you get advice from people. They are now reborn as only focusing on talking about sustainable or kind of at least conscious or socially led brands and initiatives and organizations. And they have 6 criteria that they will then only feature, products, services, profiles of particular people on their site that come under this criteria. So if you know that you can go to those platforms and the hard work has sort of been done on your behalf already, that's going to make your life a lot easier to be, by default, that more sustainable or kind of conscious consumer in future. So there's a lot, I think, for brands to think about how they segment their products in that way. So just small things, again, that could be done, or even turn into a larger campaign or a separate platform or outlet even.
You are hitting a church at the moment. One of the biggest sort of things that I'm noodling at the moment is how technology, platforms, technology in and of itself actually helps consumers be better. Whether that's Grammarly helping us all speak better or more correctly, or politically correctly. Is it Twitter democratizing audio spaces and other people like that? Those are the things where you don't make massive changes, but they make massive changes and that sort of thing. And I think that's quite an interesting one. I had it the other day in Slack, actually, and they said, you have used this word, and a lot of people find this, I can't even remember what the word was, but I've taken a screenshot of it. And some people find it challenging and that sort of thing. Like, would you prefer to use a different word? And I was like, well, if people find it challenging, I was like, oh, I'm not a challenging person. So I definitely think there's a role to sort of play that. And I think brands have a role to sort of play in that. I think it's larger for brands. I think more brands need to work together to create larger and that sort of stuff. But it's interesting. Before we jump off sustainability, Helena has a question from the chat. So please do keep your questions coming in. Helena says, do brands have to find growth? If you look at the role of sustainability in business, is growth still as important as it has been? Businesses should no longer be beholden to solely shareholders. Do we agree? Do we not agree? Alex?
Yeah, I do agree. I think, and we're seeing a real shift away from that kind of the shareholder mentality, not just in, we're beholden to them and delivering growth to them, but even just in that kind of quarterly reporting towards a much more long-term view on this stuff. I think, to slightly give what could be a fudged shit answer, I'll be honest, is it's sustainable growth. So when we speak to people like Patagonia, or you interview the guys at Ben and Jerry's, they are still like talking about growth and making profit, but it's doing it in a sustainable way. And I think to the point we were talking about, like, is it should we be as brands moving towards all this kind of sustainable stuff? And I think there's two ways of looking at it. You've got the kind of the data side, as Jason sort of touched on, of like, does the data show this is a financially viable thing to do for us? And I've seen different data sets which will tell you totally different stories. And the second part of it is a much more kind of moralistic point of view. Is like, do we think this is the right thing to do as a corporation? Do we have a responsibility to the planet, and to the environment? Now, some people, I think, can create mental separation. They can compartmentalize business, making money, from their beliefs and what's happening around them. Personally, I think it's the same kind of mental gymnastics that allows arguments like, we don't kill people, we just manufacture guns. And I think it's sort of decisions made in a bit of a vacuum. And I talked about being like a personal belief or a standpoint that becomes manifested in the way a business behaves, because that's what Patagonia and Ben and Jerry's talk about. These are the values of Yvon Chouinard and Ben Cohen and Jerry Greenfield. They're the values they founded the company on. They're kind of going to do it regardless whether it's good for their business or not, but they are laser focused on doing the right thing beyond just growth at any cost.
I think we've witnessed it a lot. We had a macro trend, I think it was 2019, called post-growth society, where it was that these metrics of success that brands had, which were growth, it might have been GDP for particular nations, that sort of thing, just have lost their relevance. And there's new metrics that they're now looking for. And it might be, happiness. Like, I think Iceland and New Zealand now have these national happiness indexes that they want to make that the metric of how successful their nation is, as opposed to, how many imports or exports that they have going in and out, or growth of businesses or something like that. So there's again this more kind of human side and a values-based side that's coming through in terms of the new metrics that people are looking at. And with that, even that what were once perhaps like negative traits in someone, like wanting time out, wanting to procrastinate, actually those being seen as quite positive things, especially in business, especially in the workplace, to give people the time and what is the rush kind of thing. There's a lot of that attitude starting to come through, definitely.
I might respectfully disagree slightly with my esteemed fellow panelists. I think it's a great aspiration to sort of think or hope that brands around the world aren't focused on growth. I think that might be a slightly US, UK centric and other Western market view. Certainly in our B2B data, there's a sense that growth is still hugely important, and a lot of people are listing it as one of their big challenges. I think from my perspective anyway, growth is still important, but it's not the only thing that's important. So you need growth, but you then also need to have your sustainability policy. You also need your diversity action. You can't just get away from growth alone now. It's one factor among many which are top of the agenda.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Jason, sticking with you for a sec, let's talk about growth in the e-commerce sector for a bit. So they 10x, didn't they, in about a year compared to 10 years or something? I can't remember what it was. But they've done a lot. We've all been buying ruthlessly online. And I'm going to talk to Catherine later poignantly about Amazon. But tell me, what does that 10x mean for the high street and pop-ups? What should brands be doing to sort of put that physical element back into their businesses? Should they?
Yeah, totally. So there's a few things to unpick there. Yeah, the data is pretty emphatic. Of all the things we tracked at the start of lockdown, e-commerce saw the biggest surge. It saw the biggest mix of existing users doing it more frequently and new people engaging. And it's the activity of all those we tracked that showed the strongest retention. So the gains it made, of all the activities, it's retained that audience the best. So absolutely, it's growing. I've been in the trends game for about 15 years now, and almost every year you hear about the death of the high street, and or you hear about how the future of the high street is purely experience led. And I think going to either of those extremes is a bit much. So there are opportunities presented for high streets by the rise of e-commerce, but for me, it sounds a bit of a cliche, and it's certainly not new, but it's all about the seamless omni-channel experience that people are looking for. So in our data anyway, around 40% of people say that they prefer shopping in store, and 60% say they prefer shopping online. And I think it's responding to what both of those groups actually want in store that will help fuel the growth. So for example, people who prefer shopping online, if they do find themselves in store, they're looking for seamless ways to connect with the e-commerce experience. So again, it's not groundbreaking, but think QR codes to get product information or to be able to order it. And they're looking for speed and convenience. So curbside pickup, self-service, mobile payments being seamlessly integrated. So I think the future of the high street is one where experiences are more important, and probably you'll see more focus on time-limited exclusive products, which serves pop-ups, and that's similar concepts very well. But for me, probably most pressing, it won't be a future where online and in-store are sort of running parallel to each other. It will be one where they're much more interactive, complementing each other, working on each other's strengths.
Alex, let's nip to a quick talk about price there and that sort of thing, because I think that's quite interesting. I've seen data from 32 to 55% about price being the number one factor of any purchase decision. How much is price now primary for offline and online? Is branding and advertising just there to keep fresh in mind, or does it really help people decide what to pick off the shelf?
The short answer is it depends. And now here comes a much longer answer problem. I think, let me put it like this. I might change, if I'm in a supermarket, I might change my brand preference for dishwasher tablets because a competitor is £3 cheaper. I'm not going to choose an Audi over a BMW because it's £3 cheaper. Like in the cold life state, the saving to me is exactly the same. I still save the same amount of money, but the category is important and the context is important. In reality, we make reasonably emotional decisions and then post-rationalize them to make ourselves feel like a smart, logical person. So you can factor in other logical considerations, like Amazon may not be the cheapest place to buy things online. It's almost certainly the most convenient. Customers complete, I think 28% of purchases on Amazon in 3 minutes or less. It's very hard to do that in a physical store. There's also an element of trustworthiness. You can easily return things. And the same can be true, offline. Like if I live in London, I want to buy a car, I might find the same car is £500 cheaper in Doncaster. And a train ticket to get me there is like 30 or 40 quid. So even though I'd still be 450 quid up on the deal, I'm not going to do it for the price, but for convenience. A lot of people just go for the nearer option. So I think that's the logical considerations. Then you do factor in like the less logical stuff. If a CEO of a company, representing a brand you buy from, has made a political statement you don't agree with, that can be a factor. We've seen it reasonably regularly. Companies like Papa John's or Chick-fil-A. And then you do also factor in the context. If I'm hungry at work, I've got a lot to do. A £3 prep sandwich is fine. That ain't going to fly for a meal for my wife's birthday. So in one context, I'm what they call satisficing, and in the other, I'm maximizing. But being seen to spend a lot of money as a show of love might be more important than the outcome of, well, I've stuffed my face and I'm not full anymore. So it really depends, I think. And online historically is, and still to this day, is like functionally brilliant at transactions. It's very, very transactional. It's great. It's not spectacularly good at the experiential side of things. This is not contradicting Jason's point. I'm actually very much agreeing with it. But if I want to buy a book, I can buy a book on Amazon or in Waterstones. And the experience of going on Amazon and buying a book, I still get the book in both experiences. But in Waterstones, I might spend time and I browse around and I feel something about myself that I'm a certain type of person who browses bookstores, and time slows down, don't feel good about myself. And 20 minutes later, I walk out with the same book I could have got in a heartbeat off Amazon. I think the context for all these things is like almost so important, you can't really draw a conclusion.
Jason, no, valid point completely. Jason, Catherine, Jason specifically, what behaviours have you seen, not just about pricing, but other things that you think are going to stick, or you think just here for now and make hay while the sun shines?
Jason, do you want to go ahead? Do you mind?
Sure. Do you mean in store in particular, or just generally?
Just generally. Let's go a bit broader, just in purchase and that thing. What are the behaviours that you're seeing that brands should care about in the next 12 to 24 months?
Sure. Okay. For me, the one I would probably point out is increased kind of tech engagement and digital love generally among older consumers. So, like I said, we tracked lots of activities, but one of the consistent thing across all of them was the increased level of engagement we saw among baby boomers in particular. So, driven directly by the pandemic, really, they're streaming more, they're gaming more, they're spending longer on social media, they're buying a wider range of things online, getting into mobile payments, all the things that they've often been a little behind in, they've started catching up. And they have the highest retention rates of those things they started, they're carrying on with. And the reason I think that's pretty important in the next few years is kind of twofold. One is, okay, the UK, the US, similar markets, we skew old already, but actually by the end of this decade, demographers will tell you that the majority of the world's consumers will be over 60. So there's a very much changing demographic story going on. And yet still, I would say a lot of marketers they used to be obsessed solely with millennials. Now it's like Gen Z and millennials that sort of play tag on who's the current flavor of the month. There's still not much interest, or there's certainly not as much time devoted to older consumers, yet they are a larger and more important and arguably more cash rich part of the audience than a lot of people recognize. So I would definitely have that on the radar.
I'd agree. It's really interesting, actually. We recently did an interview with the authors of a book, Brandsplaining, and they run an agency, Pretty Little Head, that looks at marketing, and especially marketing to women. And their big point was like overall, and this has been corroborated by like other, especially like luxury experts we've spoken to, that just women in general are a huge overlooked market in terms of across the board, how brands can better speak to and cater to those consumers with that in mind. And likewise, older women, especially because the moment that you are over 50, you are invisible to so many brands and so many advertisers, yet the amount of wealth that's sitting currently in the kind of over 50s category is vast. And, especially if we're just thinking about women in particular, they're smart, they're interesting, they're well-read, they usually, in many cases, have raised a family, and so they're, brilliant at all the kind of traits like organizing and things like that, which sounds, I don't want to generalize because that's the whole point of what this book is trying to say, but just really understanding the needs. And I think a lot of brands overlooking that. To the point of the behaviors or the kind of areas that will probably stick coming out of the pandemic, it feels quite obvious, but I just think in general, the kind of wellness category, but the new places that it's filtering into. And I know, Paul, you were perhaps interested in, like, say, luxury in particular, which is an area that I focus on at the Future Lab. And we're really seeing luxury become aligned with this idea of well-being. Of course, health is a luxury for many people around the world. But I think now, especially for hospitality, kind of going, oh, what happens to us next? It's a really good crossover opportunity now for wellness to kind of cross over with luxury, to cross over with those kind of hospitality experiences. We're seeing the rise of what we're calling healing luxury in China, especially. So products that are literally imbued with like healing energies and things like that, or they've been made in a particular color that maybe has local connotations around wellness, or using materials that have been blessed. It sounds a little bit woo, but for a country where spirituality is very central to what they do, you know, having a product that you're carrying with you, almost like a talisman or clothing that is going to tune into your mood through a particular material, particular color, you know, that speaks a lot to that audience that, of course, especially, you know, being the center originally of COVID for China, it's like wellness has become a huge thing for the nation. So I think that's one to keep an eye on. And actually off the back of that, sports are really kind of coming through. Of course, we've got the Euros around the corner, but for luxury goods especially, and again, China, tennis has become a huge thing. We've seen Adidas recently launch new tennis collections, but even Gucci doing them. And then Mr. Porter has launched a golf range. So like we're really seeing this re-embracement of being outdoors. It's moving away from what we've seen a lot of brands do, which is the kind of hiking outdoors thing, you know, the North Face and Gucci, things like that, into more of actually those really prosaic everyday sports that we might have done as kids or teenagers, or, you know, the business sports coming back through. And I think we'll see a lot of time and attention kind of played to how that social aspect of wellness can kind of tune into brands and customer experiences as well. So should be a sporty couple of years ahead, I think.
I certainly hope so. I think that's a big area where brands could, I don't see a lot of brands doing things in that sort of area. Number one, it sometimes takes a lot to organise, but it can be as simple as literally just spray painting circles on grass. I've seen that in Canary Wharf, and it's just part of it is social distancing, but also that could be the Calm Spot by Calm app or whatever it is. We spoke with Michael Axton Smith, a couple of 10 by 10s ago, and he was very fervent that like we've got to get Calm out of the app and into places and that sort of stuff. So I definitely think that's a big opportunity for brands to embrace, you know, why
so they
not
did something really interestingly with Naomi Osaka, I believe, with Roland Garros, right? Where as a tennis player, she said, actually, for my mental health, this isn't good. I need to step out. I think Calm actually pledged to cover the costs of like the fee or the fine that she was being charged for stepping out the competition. So they were making quite a big statement there, maybe even aligning themselves with that holistic well-being aspect. I mean, and the studies show, I mean, our most recent trend, Equilibrium Cities, which we published in March, which looks at the future of our urban environments, especially through this post-COVID lens, or into COVID lens, as we're calling it, because of course we're still far from the pandemic being over. But how, again, we can make our urban spaces and the customer experience more inclusive, especially with a view to things like being outdoors, urban wellness. The NHS is now doing green social prescribing. So it's actually prescribing people time spent gardening in their community as a way to feel well, as opposed to pharmaceuticals. So really interesting shifts that are starting to happen across the board.
Nice. Yeah, I think it's such a rich space for people to play with. It's sort of like fixing things like playgrounds and that sort of thing, like real things that people will use on a day-to-day basis. Put a plaque up, put it in your colors, whatever it is, like get it approved and let's just get some things done. I think that's great that they threw some money behind the tennis player, but I think that's a badging exercise, a PR exercise. I want them to see some. If they were going to do that, they'd do it for the whole of the tennis people. You know, that's
I think they did say that they were going to then offer to pay for perhaps other players if they had a similar need, or if they wanted, there was some other side to it that felt a little bit more longevity led as opposed to just a quick responsive campaign. But yeah, it's a good point, not just doing things for the sake of the PR.
I definitely think so. You mentioned luxury there. Let's talk about luxury. And when I think about luxury, I think about obviously big brands, Gucci and that sort of thing. But also I write the newsletter, What Did Amazon Do This Week? Plug. But talk to me about their relationship with luxury, because it's not an easy one, is it? And I think more and more people sort of, they might not want to go into the stores. Some people, that's all they want to do and that's the thing. But when it comes to luxury, Amazon's got a big problem with counterfeit issues. Do you think they're doing a good job with sorting that out so that the future of luxury brands sort of coexists? Or do you think e-commerce is just like a really bad thing for luxury brands anyway?
I don't think it's a bad thing for luxury brands, but I'll come on to where I think that could expand. I think with Amazon, the main thing is they launched their luxury stores program last year. They began with Oscar de la Renta. It was like the flagship brand. And in the time since, they've accrued about 35 brands now on there. So they include names like Missoni, Christopher Kane. They've got a couple of jewelry and kind of footwear brands and beauty brands. But of course, it's no competitor for, you know, the Net-a-Porters or the Ukes or the kind of My Theresas of this world, or even Selfridges as a website, you know. So I think But the thing with Amazon being as it is, I don't think maybe counterfeiting is so much of a worry for people shopping on there, because I wouldn't buy luxury, let's say, from Amazon. I think it's the fact that it's such, and it was the kind of point that Alex was making earlier, it's such a prosaic platform. The user experience is not about having that relationship that you might want with a company, or the customer service or the customer experience, that as a luxury brand, even with their luxury stores kind of fascia that they've created, it doesn't feel very special. And what Amazon could have done, my 2 pence worth, is actually created a whole separate site that used all of its capabilities, all of the background, all of the coding, all of the skills that it has in-house to create something really exciting and really fresh for a luxury consumer who is now more confident than ever shopping online, as opposed to just sticking it in the existing Amazon platform. Of course, that might be their reason for doing that, because they have the supply chain there, because they have the capabilities and the functionality. And I'm sure there will be, your consumer around the world that will go, I can get it on Amazon and I know I'm going to get it next day. And of course, in the US where it's launched, it's able to offer that, 2-day shipping, which other luxury brands might not be able to do in such a vast kind of nation. So it's a tricky one, because I think they've tried to do something, but they could have maybe executed it a lot better to actually really compete. And I think even Kering have said, like, we don't really see, it was Jose Neves of Farfetch was like, I don't see Amazon luxury stores as a competitor to us, because there just isn't the kind of kudos that comes with it. And it's just a bit of an unsexy shopping experience. I think alternatively, where we're seeing the kind of excitement in e-commerce now is almost the metaverse. So it's these other existing platforms, be they gaming platforms, be them kind of virtual realms that exist online. So whether it's Roblox, whether it's Animal Crossing, for example, where luxury brands have been courting customers and done all right there, they've kind of made a splash. So whether it's, again, like Gucci creating a digital version of its real life exhibition on Roblox that you can go and explore. Again, I think I mentioned it earlier on, they created, when they launched a tennis collection last year, they actually worked with a tennis game that already existed to kind of sell both virtual versions of the products and the real life versions of the products. Even the browsing experience of something like the Yeezy supply website is so different, and you can learn about the models and you can see how to match and generate outfits, that there's a lot that luxury brands are doing now online that's way more creative than ever before. And I think a lot of this has come off the back of COVID closing their physical stores down, closing the doors, like halting any kind of real life experiences that they've had to then get creative in these digital spaces, which just has the double effect of also allowing them to court maybe more of a Gen Z customer in those spaces as well. So yeah, I imagine we'll continue to see more of this kind of both real life and then virtual experience kind of unfolding more. It's what we've described as kind of omnilux lifestyles, omnilux luxury, literally, that you can kind of find it anywhere, anytime. And again, it depends on the type of experience you want. If you want something very quickly, you can have it. That's where Amazon could come in really handy. But if you do want more of that slower kind of quest maybe to get hold of that luxury product, there's the novelty of maybe a gaming experience, then that's also becoming really valuable for brands.
Jason, Alex, any sort of thoughts on Amazon before I ask you all about technology?
I mean, I agree with what Catherine's saying. I think the like when you looked at what happened last year, basically the entire world did a massive pivot to digital because it had to. And it didn't matter whether you were socializing or at work, it all felt the bloody same. We were just staring at a laptop screen. And it was kind of functionally passable, but viscerally miserable. Yeah, and I think especially in the worlds of luxury, where the value, like, it doesn't really have functional value. A Gucci handbag has no more functional value than a Tesco carrier bag. It's a huge amounts of the value are wrapped up in the brand and the signaling. So when you go into a Chanel store or a Prada store, you've got the marble floors, the staircases, the beautifully created products. When you're online, you're just looking at the same grid that Amazon uses to sell books. It conveys nothing of the brand at all. And I think historically luxury brands have been really slow on digital uptake generally. They're like, and now it's getting quite uneven, I think, out there. Some are very good and some are way behind the curve. And I think it's a huge opportunity, frankly.
I mean, Chanel, for example, doesn't sell online, neither does Patek Philippe or Rolex, unless you're buying pre-owned from somewhere else. They don't have necessarily like a direct web presence, which makes you kind of go, what, how is that possible? But you know,
yeah, it's kind of, it's exclusivity mutated into a bad place.
It comes down to it. It's like building a brand and building a respect and building an ethereal something for products. Comes down to like your strategy. But really, when you look at Gen Z and you look at Supreme and stuff like that, they're building the same shit as everyone else, just a little bit more exclusive, a little bit less droppy, you know, and that's the thing. They're using old strategies and old mechanics, but they're doing it in a new way. And that's why people are losing their minds. But also, when you think about it, the stuff that they're producing isn't the same as a luxury watch. There's you know, experience gone in that and all of that sort of thing. Slapping a logo on a wallet doesn't inspire me, but I'm fascinated by the fact that they brought legions of fans and that sort of stuff. That's one to me.
There's something we'll have upcoming that kind of builds on that, and it's actually a guest piece, so I can't take credit for this, but from an agency, Day One, they're writing a piece for us about meme brands, and literally that idea of, in a way, brands are now becoming so ironic, especially for a Gen Z audience, that they know that they're purposefully purposeless kind of thing. So there's the Mischief platform, which is one example. There's a few kind of drinks brands like Ugly Drinks that are just like, we don't really exist for any reason, we just do what we do, and they're kind of subverting this whole thing that we've seen a lot of brands try to mean something to Gen Z, and they're just like, no, we don't care. So this idea of meme brands, I think, would also be something to keep an eye on.
I like that realism. I think that's good. Any words, Jason, on that, or can I move on?
No, go for it. I was only going to agree, so.
Okay, we mentioned Amazon and we mentioned technology, putting those together and you get their glasses or everything Alexa when it comes to Amazon. But Snap just plopped out their AR spectacles, which don't look as terrible as the first ones, but a little less terrible, should we say. Apple's imminent. You've also got Google coming back in the market as well. Let's have a sense check. How big is AR going to be in the next 12 to 24 months? Do you think brands should be banking on it, or is mass adoption 5 years away? We'll start with Jason.
I would take the cautious view. If every year I've heard about the death of the high street, every year I've heard about the rise of VR, AR, and various other related technologies. Like if you take gaming as an example, mobiles and tablets are the ubiquitous devices. Games consoles, PCs, laptops have sort of pivoted to support those devices rather than competing against them as they used to. Even among your hardcore gamers, so those who are everyday gamers, never any more than 10% are actively engaging with things like VR, AR. So they are a really exciting niche for me, and there'll be lots of innovation and cool stuff, and there'll be loads of headlines that seem interesting, but that doesn't necessarily translate into day-to-day engagement from mainstream consumers yet. It would be where I'd put my money, especially if we're talking short-term, even kind of medium-term future.
I kind of agree. It's that thing of the big question is why? Like if you are a brand creating an AR experience or having, again, you know, Snap, sure, like they are all about imagery and visuals, whatever else. But as we saw with the Google Glass, it's become a workplace tool. It's become something for supply chains and training and manufacturing, that you can check your processes and it can monitor things. If it's just kind of technology for the sake of technology, which sometimes it can feel like in these scenarios, you know, really what is the user uptake? What are the scenarios? It has to be helpful. It has to be beneficial. I think like Huawei and Gentle Monster, which is a South Korean brand, made a pair of glasses recently that have, you know, just your inbuilt speaker. I think Bose might have done something similar. So you can kind of listen to music, you can take a call, you can tap your phone. Sure, that's kind of got a function, but it doesn't need to really do anything more than that at this moment in time, because if you really want an AR experience, you probably would just use your phone, because then you're immediately going to maybe share that experience with a friend, you know, like we've seen with virtual try-ons or you know, virtual exhibitions outdoors where you can, you know, scan your camera and see a Jeff Koons blow up dog kind of right there. So I think there's got to be a kind of functional purpose to it. It's otherwise it just feels a little bit meaningless.
Yeah. I think you bring up a really good point there of what the difference between a phone and a glass can offer someone. You know, not only is it just like ubiquity and it can, you know, something, oh yes, I would like to know what that shiny thing is over there and that's the thing. But you can create new environments, you know, and that sort of thing. And it becomes the sort of, I always say it's the Tony Stark spectrum of reality, like middle, you've got like where we probably are, and then always Tony Stark on the other end. But
maybe for a new generation of this kind of hedonism that we see being bandied about as a term, this escapism, this kind of enlightened states, as we've described it, that people want to get themselves into. Again, building maybe on some of that wellness aspect, the whole kind of psychology and psychedelics aspect of perhaps, you know, the glass could be a really interesting example for that, going and having a kind of out of body, otherworldly experience. Like that could be a really fun, where it isn't a bulky VR headset, for example. But yeah, there needs to be a reason, I suppose.
I mean, for me, this comes back to a point Jason made earlier, which is like the latest research from YouGov looked at technology adoption, and it identified in the UK, I mean, sort of late adopters are 49% of the population.
Yeah.
And actually globally, it's not quite, it's a little bit different on the specifics, but broadly, most people are late adopters. It was nearer to like 4% as early adopters. And it did kind of naturally skew with age demographic as well. So like the over 50s are more likely to be a late adopter to tech. I think if you're going to keep an eye on something, I would keep an eye on like general media consumption habits across age bands and how they've changed. There was some fascinating research from the IPA and their Touchpoints data that came out towards the end of last year. They found that normally the 16 to 34 age groups have a reasonable correlation with the over 55s. They've got about a 58% similarity in how they consume media. During lockdown, that absolutely bifurcated, and there was only an 8% similarity. So if you're doing anything like in sort of media planning, these groups no longer behaved in the same way. You were not hitting the same people. If you want to keep an eye on something, it certainly wouldn't be AR. It'd be looking at what the hell these people are doing, and are you actually reaching these people? And remembering that, you know, that as Jason was saying, a lot of these people have a lot of wealth, a lot of the spending cash. They are the late adopters of technology. And what are they doing on media? Are the lockdown habits staying? Are we going to revert back, you know, to the norm?
Yeah. Interesting point, because we've seen radio and of course reading really come through as big lockdown habits, because people are indoors all day. Those usual drive time slots that people would have completely shifted. You know, Radio 2 has become the nation's biggest station, and it's interesting to see how that's impacted. And again, a large number of those listeners are under 25, because they are maybe just hanging out there at home. There may be, of course, streaming content as well. So that might not be a long-term focus, but we have seen that start to play out. Radio, of course, physical book reading, I think across the board anyway. But there is also maybe this desire to kind of get back to kind of holding something and having a more tactile experience as well.
Let's do one round of quick fire, and then we'll do closing thoughts, if that's all right. So the quick fire question is going to be audio spaces and podcasts and that sort of thing. They obviously skyrocketed during the pandemic, then they actually dropped off a cliff, and now nobody really knows where they are and that sort of thing. What of audio spaces post-pandemic? Jason, start with you.
What's happening to them, did you say?
What do you think the future of audio spaces are? Do you think they're just going to replace podcasts? Do you think, oh no, it's just going to go back to podcasts? Where do you think the space is going?
Lots of exciting, interesting stuff happening, but podcasts are well established, well understood, increasingly available from a wider range of sources on a more diverse range of topics. So that's where I'd put my flag down. So for now, anyway.
Twitter spaces and things like that. Okay, Catherine?
It's an interesting one, actually, because we've been reading a little bit around, you know, spaces like Clubhouse, etc. You know, they had as well, then they died down. But actually, you know, will they be this future marketing tool where, again, you could have a more engaging conversation if you are a luxury brand or a retail brand, or perhaps brand that's built on, you know, offering services. So let's say a really interesting, again, another audio example is TripIn, which is a travel collective for young people. And their Spotify podcast, for example, has done really, really well because they are sharing interesting stories. So it's often kind of going, yeah. So I think maybe Clubhouse, but I also think with that, the kind of OnlyFans aspect is also something that brands could explore. It's obviously got particular connotations at the moment, but OnlyFans really wants to break free of what it's been associated with initially, you know, the kind of live streaming, the kind of paid model experience, let's say, to move more into some brand content. So merging maybe the two, that kind of private experience that you can have with a brand.
It's a very polite way of describing OnlyFans. Maybe
we all know what it's about.
Alex, what do you reckon about audio space and podcasting?
My short answer is probably niche, to be honest. And I think use it as such. So if you have like a community that you really want to get in on a specific thing, run with that. Someone who's like, I'm a lean forward person for this aspect of this brand. I'm here for it. I actually do want a relationship. I'm one of those rare people. It's probably going to be good for those people. But in terms of the mass, I just don't see it. You know, looking at, you know, just knowing like all the sort of research out of like Ehrenberg Bass about your brand growth does not come from the loyalists. It comes from getting people who don't buy it to buy at all. Like I think it's 60% of all Adidas sales are first-time buyers. You know, that's where your bulk of your sales are coming from. If you do want to cultivate a certain little community and keep them close, it could be a place for that. But it feels like a niche in a niche.
We follow this, especially in China. There's a lot of, again, I keep coming back to luxury brands because it's where I kind of have a lot of focus, but because again, the whole idea of shopping through apps is kind of so everyday. It's just how, you know, retail and especially luxury goods acquisition functions in a nation like China. But they have a lot of these kind of closed private groups. Again, it could be something like a WhatsApp group where if you know that you've got 10 quite loyal customers, or maybe customers in a particular city or a particular neighborhood, and they feel like part of this special group where they can have a chat with a brand advisor, they can share outfit advice, they can share tips, and you're kind of creating a community, you're allowing them to feel good. And kind of to Alex's point, it's almost creating that niche where you will almost in future maybe have these dedicated like micro group customer engagement specialists, and then also the feedback you're getting in return from those brand enthusiasts. You know, that's going to be really interesting to hear like what they think of new collections, you know, how they're wearing, how they're styling, you know, their outfits or something like that. So there's a lot that could actually be learned from almost getting to know little black book style, kind of who those regular shoppers are and how you can better engage and learn from them.
Sorry, I know this is quick fire, but I think that is like a super interesting point. Like all of our research and the way, if you think about how cookies are receding and how other IDs might have problems in the future, I think the nature of communities, like-minded interests formed around similar interests is going to be just huge. And there are so many tech areas at the moment where communities are forming, maybe in the metaverse, maybe in sort of live streaming, maybe in how we watch TV and are now more social with that. I think that's going to be a massive area of focus in the coming years.
Yeah, I think sorry, I'm just going to keep building on other people's points here. Like there's an anthropologist guy called Grant McCracken who talks about brands being networks of the unacquainted. You're all like, you don't know each other, but you're kind of into this thing. And I think, you know, when in the earlier days of you know, sort of social, I think brands are like brilliant. So we are the thing they care about. And I think that the slight shift we're seeing now is like, it's not that I specifically care about Nike, but I'm really into like tennis. And actually Nikes might be the best people to facilitate that network of people coming together. And so it's less kind of brand at the center and much more as the brand as the facilitator of, we get it, you guys are super into this thing, more than us necessarily. You've got to be a little bit more self-effacing and step back a bit.
I love that. That kind of covers what I was going to offer you at the end, which was like one last plug or one last recommendation for people. But does anyone have anything final just to add very quickly?
Good
Silence is compliant.
Yeah.
Go to the website, says they. Right, okay. That is our time for the day. You all look lightly toasted, so I guess I went easy on you. Thank each of you for doing this. I know you're phenomenally busy, and I love it when competitors come together. Also,
thanks for having us.
Colleagues come together.
It's fascinating.
All right, thank you. I think it helps others and really pushes things forward as well. Thanks also to you guys for tuning in and asking great questions. There is one in the chat which I'm seeing from Max, which I'll get everybody to answer on the email, which we'll send out afterwards. The next 10 by 10 is actually with two incredibly smart women. We've got Kim Scott author of New York Times bestselling Radical Candor, and now also Just Work, Get Shit Done Fast and Fair, with her co-founder, Trialyn Bryant. I've interviewed them a couple of times, one for TVD and since, and they're absolutely phenomenal, all to do with bias and everything that we need to sort of change in the world to make it a better place for work and outside. We're going hybrid for that one, so I get to see actual physical people, crazy times and that sort of stuff. So there'll also be virtual seats as well. So look out for details of that. Drop me a line if I can help you, and I'll let you know before anyone else as well. Head over to Fora as well for all of that. They've also got other things planned, so make sure you do check out foraspace.com for all the events. And there's other things going on with 10 by 10 this season as well. Drop me a line on Twitter, Paul_Armstrong, and connect with all of the speakers that you've had today. We'll drop you all of their details in the email that will be coming tomorrow with a few extras as well, wink, so that'll be good. Thanks again for tuning in. I really appreciate it. I know time is tight for everyone these days, and so is attention, and I'm honored that you spent it with us. Thanks again. Have a great day, and we'll see you at the next 10 by 10. Everybody, giveaway.
Cheers, Paul. Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.